стабільний уряд, але ми не Швейцарія. Робота складна, ніхто спасибі не скаже.
The Swiss president Simonetta Sommaruga flew into Ukraine for a 3-day visit. She met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, civil society and journalists. She also went to the Donbass to speak with the residents.
It's a huge challenge for Mr. Zelenskyy, and at the same time our cooperation has shown that for a long time it's a good thing. We can really work together. I think it's so important also to have this exchange of prisoners to make on a concrete way also some progress. We want to go on with this kind of humanitarian aid, and this is also why I wanted to go to Donbass, to be there and also to see what our country can do for the population.
President Sommaruga, you've met with President Volodymyr Zelenskyy yesterday. This was your second official meeting with him, and he's been a president for over a year now. What do you think about his presidency so far?
Well, I think it's a huge challenge for Mr. Zelenskyy, and at the same time our cooperation has shown that for a long time it's a good thing. We can really work together, and when I met the President, Mr. Zelenskyy, in Davos at the beginning of this year, we had a very good exchange, and we said that we want to go on having this kind of collaboration. On the one hand, economic collaboration, but also to support Ukraine in this reform process. And at the same time, of course, in the conflict in the eastern Ukraine, Switzerland supports the population there with humanitarian aid. So this state visit now is also to show that our cooperation shall go on, and coming here and seeing all these opportunities and this potential, I'm very glad to go on and have an even stronger cooperation.
And during the array of yesterday's meetings, you also seem to have confirmed that the 2022 Ukraine Reform Conference will be held in Switzerland. And President Zelenskyy came into power by promising reforms and getting rid of corruption that usually stands in the way of these reforms. We've had a lot of staff changes within the government since he came into power, and also within the prosecutor's office, and his support is dropping. Do you think he's really still going to deliver on his reform promises? Because so far we haven't seen much. And are you happy with the state of reforms in Ukraine?
Well, of course, the expectations of the population, they are enormous. I know that as well. Also in our country, people want to have the reforms. At the same time, reforms take also some time. Discussing with several people also here in Ukraine, I heard that, for example, the reform in the decentralization is going on very well. This is a very important reform. Of course, anti-corruption is also a priority, and Switzerland can also support in this sense. Preparing this Ukraine Reform Conference, I think we can really think together what are the main reforms, how can we prepare this conference, and Switzerland is very honored to have the possibility and the opportunity to prepare this conference together with Ukraine.
At the same time, we had a lot of things that didn't indicate like a very positive direction, as in like some reformers have been fired or dismissed, and as well there were some recent changes in the National Bank of Ukraine with Yakov Smolny resigning due to alleged political pressure. Can you comment on that, specifically on the changes within the NBU?
Well, most important thing for a national bank is its independency. This is also in our country. Sometimes politics would like to talk and to tell them what to do. Independence of a national bank is so important. On the other hand, I think that, of course, the reforms, the expectations of the population that things should change, they are huge, and that the COVID-19 pandemic has also even made it more important still, because the economic situation of the different countries, also our country, also Ukraine, it's even more important now to create working places. And this is why I think it's important we have also investments in Ukraine. I came here with a delegation of company leaders who want to also to cooperate with Ukraine, for example, in the transport, in the railway sector, in the energy sector. So I think this is the potential of our two countries to have really to cooperate and to have investments here, because this is good for Ukraine, of course, but it's also good for Switzerland. So if we can find there solutions which are good for both countries, we have a win-win situation.
And you probably know that historically Ukraine has a lot of problems with oligarchs and their influence here, especially in politics. Specifically when it comes to Zelenskyy, there's a lot of talks about him being tied with oligarch Ihor Kolomoisky. They are business partners, this is no secret, that's a fact. But also Kolomoisky had some property in Switzerland and lived there, and also he had a lawsuit opened there against him. It's to do with the National Bank of Ukraine. Do you know anything about the current state of this lawsuit that was opened against him there? And do you think this Kolomoisky's influence here is troubling, like he's worrying?
Well, I think sometimes it's also difficult to compare the situation of our country, of Switzerland, of Ukraine, is very different. So what I can say in my country, the independent judiciary, for example, this is really most important, also to have the rule of law, to have really the security that if something does not work, then you have an independent judiciary who takes this case and have also a prosecution if this is needed. So in our country, I was a former minister of justice. I always strengthened that very much. For the situation of asset recovery, we have been discussing this with President Zelenskyy, and we have also signed an agreement so that Switzerland can support Ukraine for preparing the process for asset recovery, because Switzerland is very interested to give this money back to Ukraine, but it needs some processes, and this is sometimes quite complicated. So if we can give a support and a know-how exchange, it can help also Ukraine to really get back this money, because it's also something which is in the interest of both countries.
Switzerland is the fifth largest donor of humanitarian aid to Ukraine, and a lot of reintegration efforts have been taken by President Zelenskyy, such as disengagement of forces, prisoner exchanges, the setup of this Russian language TV channel called Dom that is broadcast to the occupied territories. How do you feel about these Zelensky's efforts?
Well, what I can say about Switzerland is that we really would help to find a solution for this conflict in eastern Ukraine. There are also already the processes are there, the international framework is there. We are very grateful that President Zelenskyy said he wants to have a dialogue, to go on, to find solutions. For Switzerland, it's most important to be really with our humanitarian help, be there for the population who is really also in difficult situation. We are very grateful that we can have our humanitarian aid on both sides of the contact line. And we want to go on with this kind of humanitarian aid, and this is also why I wanted to go to Donbass, to be there and also to see what our country can do for the population at this place.
At the same time, I know you advocate for a peaceful resolution to the war, and Ukraine has been taking all these steps, but at the same time, Russia-led separatists keep attacking and the ceasefire is not maintained for longer than some hours. And then the latest, there was the situation with the medic who was being killed, who's presumably from Estonia, but it's not been confirmed by Ukraine yet. But let's not go into what Russia could do and should do to end the conflict. But do you think Ukraine could do something differently? What is Ukraine lacking in terms of its approach to ending the war?
Well, I think that you have the Normandy format, you have the trilateral contact group, which is led by a Swiss person. I'm very glad that Switzerland can also, with the people who are engaged, who represents the OSCE, so that they can help in a form of dialogue to find a solution. I think it's not one country alone who can really contribute, but it has to be the process which is there. It needs quite a lot of patience. It's very difficult. So for us, it's so important that we can give the help directly humanitarian aid to the people. This is where Switzerland is very, I hope, very helpful, and it's part of our foreign policy to help people with humanitarian aid. At the same time, Switzerland is very clear about the international law. Switzerland from the beginning said that the annexation of the Crimea was against international law, that we cannot accept that. So, I mean, Switzerland is very clear about that, but at the same time, if we can help the people, we do it.
And in your opinion, Ukraine has been taking the right steps. It's just down to international partners and probably Russia to end this.
Well, I think it's to the countries to find the solution. I hope that OSCE can also help, and the Trilateral Contact Group can really do its work. But we all know it's very difficult, it's very complicated. This is why I think it's so important also to have this exchange of prisoners, to make on a concrete way also some progress, so that people can see that their living conditions, that we are interested that they have the best living conditions possible. And this is also the sense of the humanitarian aid.
How did Switzerland manage to severely reduce the number of coronavirus cases? Because you used to have around 800 to 1,000, and now you have under 100 new cases every day.
Well, when we had almost 1,000 cases a day, it was in mid-March, we closed, but not everything. We taught people to stay at home. We closed the restaurants, but we do not close the whole economy. So people, I think they realize that now all the social distancing, the hygiene measures are important. They know now how more or less they can manage this virus, because this virus is still there. And now we opened again the restaurants, but we all know that we have to be careful, and so because the virus is still there. But I think we managed, together with the population, to show what are the measures we have to take, so we can keep this virus, that it does not spread anymore. And at the same time, we had to support our economy, especially our small and medium companies. We gave them some credits, so they had enough liquidity, and we gave them also, we have an insurance for unemployment, so they could get some money there, so that people were not unemployed, but they could go on working. But the situation is still difficult, because Switzerland is a country who is living a lot on exports, and as long as exports are not possible in certain regions, for this kind of economy, the situation is still very difficult.
And is the coronavirus and the quarantine affecting the environment in Switzerland badly? For example, in Ukraine, you can kind of notice that a lot more plastic is being used. Is that the case in Switzerland, or are you managing with that well?
Well, there were positive effects. People did not fly anymore. The airplanes stayed on the ground. People used less energy also. So this, you say this is a positive effect on the environment. People also appreciated very much in environment and nature. On the other hand, of course, now we have the situation with the masks. Everybody is throwing these kind of things away. My aim is that we can learn also from this COVID crisis. For example, that nature, that environment is something very important for us. And on a long term, I mean, we still have the climate crisis, we should not forget. I'm also a Minister of Environment, and we have to take the measures, for example, for energy efficiency, not throwing things away, having the buildings more energy efficient. And by the way, in this sense, we have also an excellent cooperation with Ukraine, and we want to exchange, because I think we can learn from each other. And energy efficiency, for example, in the buildings is so important, because it costs less money to those who are living there. It's good for the environment, it's good for the climate. So I think that, for example, efficiency is something we should work together even much more.